Welcome to our Milne call. This is our presentation on the Missouri Testlets, and I asked Sean Bates to be on because he is the Director of Assessment for DESE. Is that correct? That's your title?
No, that's
Okay,
actually
that's a lie.
You just play with titles, just so you can move things around. Coordinator of Standards, Curriculum, and Assessment.
Wow. Okay. Well, we're happy to have you on. I know you're the world traveler, and we just appreciate you making time in your schedule for all the educators on the call and those that will watch the video later. And so I think we're going to go ahead and get started, if that's okay. I'm Sue Herrera, the Director of, what am I, Shauna? The Director of Instructional Development and a consultant. That's who I am, right? Okay.
Yep.
And who else is on the call today? Can you introduce yourself real quick? How about the lady in the turquoise jacket? Who are you? Shauna, that would be you.
Oh, oops. You should have said velvet. Then I would have known.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Shauna Stefanchik, president of Step Up.
Thanks. Let's just keep going.
Jess.
Jennifer Renneker. I'm data and assessment specialist in Republic.
Welcome.
Jennifer could probably do this.
I'm Jess Gray, and I'm the lead literacy consultant for Step Up.
I'm Lindsay Leonard. I'm the elementary principal at Pilot Grove.
Amanda Davis said in the chat, she is the instructional coach in the Fox C6 School District south of St. Louis. She said her camera and her mic are not working. I know what that's like. All right. It looks, if there's anyone else that wants to unmute or drop something in the chat, introduce yourself. We appreciate it. But
I'm Kelly Williams. I'm from California Middle School. I am the behavior specialist and interventionist at our 5 through 8 building.
Bless you. Thank you. All right. I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Sean.
All right, let's see. Can you see a screen?
We cannot.
Well, how about if I say actually hit share?
Okay.
Would that work?
Yeah, almost. It's starting.
Yep,
There we
it's
go.
working.
All right, so I've been invited here and glad. Thank you for taking the time out. I know this is something the assessment office wants to do, is try to have sessions with our district testing coordinators. It's trying to get it scheduled to meet everybody's time is always difficult. Your time and our time is now just being more consumed. But I know there's a lot of questions around the MITS. We call the Missouri Instructional Testlets that we developed. So just kind of really to start out, this came from a lot of our QA visits, when we're out with school districts. We get the opportunity to talk with educators, principals, sometimes, the curriculum coaches, anybody that's out there who's really wanting to grab our ear and say, hey, we need this, we need that. One of our big questions is, what do you use to prepare for the state assessment? And we always get a lot of questions or comments about, we use the practice form. And, the comments are like, we like the practice form, but we really hate the practice form. And I say, I know what you're talking about. The practice form is a clone of the summative. So really, when do you use that? We've got districts who start using it in October. Teachers are frustrated because the data really isn't reflective, and they're like, my kids struggle with it. That's really wasn't designed for. Then we've got the polar opposite, where we've got districts who are giving the practice form the week before the operational test. We pull the data, daily of what assessments have been given during the spring window. And it really scared me that the last week of April, there was 18,000 practice tests administered. I'm like, that's not a good time. So we've really been looking at it. We know that the practice form's got its good pieces and bad, just about what to use with that. And I'll kind of talk about how to kind of maybe look at some of the practice form along with the MITS. But the MITS really came down to teachers needed something smaller, something that they could really use in the classroom. And this is why you will see that these are not Missouri assessment items. They're not Missouri practice testlets. We really were diligent about saying instructional testlets. So using these items before, during, or after instruction is going to be up to the LEA, and how you want to use them. But we really want to say that we hope that that data can really go back to doing the one thing that we're talking about with our SRSA application, is giving teachers informal data or formal data that they can really use to talk about that standard or sets of standards when we talk about ELA. So, again, what are these? They're really supplemental materials that we've come out of our item bank. We didn't go out and purchase this from any of the vendors out there in the world. This was all Missouri Educator developed. It came out of our item bank. When we bring teachers in to write items, are these items that we didn't want to use on the state test? No. There's maybe a few items that once we started evaluating it and looking at our item specs and kind of talk about this, there's a 4th grade standard talking about, I guess, expanded notation. So we've got an item in there that really goes a little above what the fair game assessment would be. And I've had teachers already yell at me last year about how it was unfair putting these items into the instructional testlets, because the item really does go beyond what we would assess. If we're talking about expanded notation, we're talking about being very limited at the 4th grade, that it'll be 4,130. It's going to be 4 times 1,000, or 4,000 plus 3,000, whatever. But in the item, it goes a little bit more expanded, 4 times 10 to the third, or whatever. It starts getting to that scientific notation, which is the upper end of the actual standard itself. If you're really thinking about that top end mastery of those kiddos, is it fair for the state assessment? We didn't think so. Or my predecessors in math, said, no, that's not. But we thought it was a good item to put in for instruction. So you may see some items that go above where that is, and we pulled those items specifically to put into these instructional testlets. But again, for mathematics, they're very discrete. So each of the testlets, the 14 or the number of testlets that we can build for each grade, are very specific to a standard. So that really does help the educator to be able to pinpoint, I taught this standard, or maybe even that domain and the standard was in there, then they could pull that testlet up and kind of give an assessment. There are multiple items in those testlets for that standard. So it, again, gives the teacher a multiple view, maybe how to ask a constructive response, a drag and drop, a multiple choice, a multi-select, different ways to ask the question and still try to get to that gleaning of the student being able to show mastery, instead of how they've been practicing it in their math book or their math lessons. This is one of the things that I am starting to worry about, is we're getting really heavy in the computation, but where is the kids really demonstrating their thinking and being able to apply this? And you hear this, especially when you talk to the middle school teachers. Yeah, the kids know how to go through the steps, but they can't tell me what the steps are. And when we build onto those steps, then they're lost because they really don't know how to apply the knowledge that they've got. So we're really hoping that this can allow those teachers a lot of flexibility. Again, this is all voluntary. You use them as you see fit. So we'll kind of go on, and I'm sorry, I did not move to that slide where I was talking about all this. But again, we're really thinking, and we're starting to hear multiple ways, and I'll try to talk about what I'm hearing about at the end of the slide deck here, which is pretty small. But again, thinking about where we want to see this is hopefully that the educators are using that data. And again, it's use it as you see fit. We've got districts who are looking at it as using the instructional testlet as a pretest, and then they come back and they reassign it and do it again as a post. That's okay. It's nothing. We're not using any of this data. We just kind of look at the data, especially the constructive response, to get better training materials is what we're really going to be doing with that. We're really not looking at individual schools and going, look how bad this was, or looking at that data, because we don't know when you administer it, how you're administering it, how you're using that, and it shouldn't be that way. This is another piece of what we're wanting to look at. Assessment itself is not being intrusive and punitive, but really being to that other side of that spectrum of learning and as learning, and not, and getting to the big for learning. But, of learning is always going to be that back end, but the for and as is what we really want to. We're really hoping that we can use these testlets for that purpose and not have assessment be such a negative connotation. Because it's always about that, even in the local assessments, sometimes the kids go, we all heard that as teachers, they all grunt, oh, great, it's the spelling test or it's the math test. We need to assess to know where you're at. That's what assessments are for. There's no order in this. When you look at that and how we've set this up, we just said testlet 1 to testlet 11 or whatever the numbers scheme could be for that grade. We didn't put them in any order that this is how you would instruct. The system, if you do use the DRC system, it is one of the few things, and when we talk about DRC and flexibility, they were able to do this, is you would just be able to go in and say, hey, I want to start 7. I want to come in 2 weeks from now and I want to do number 2. You can easily do that and assign that and push that out to the kiddos. So I know that a couple districts, when we first pushed this out, was like, well, is this the state scope and sequence? It is not. It is just how we clustered items and just quickly put stuff together, not thinking about how they come out sequentially in an instruction. Again, where we want to really say you have absolute control, and that's why we try to build in that flexibility. You administer when you have taught it, and you're ready to assess it. One of the big things that we're looking at with this is if you do an online administration, use it through the DRC platform, we are looking to give data back in 24 hours, and I'll highlight that again, but it's really about the timely feedback. That's what you always want from any type of state assessment system or state assessments or even your local assessments. You want to get timely feedback. So this is something that we're looking at, is how to give feedback very quickly back to the teacher. What content? Again, for right now, as of today, we have 3 through 8 English language arts, mathematics, and science. Roughly, we've got anywhere from 9 to 11 MITS per grade. They kind of vary. Now, when I talked about mathematics, they are very discrete. So for that grade level, it'll be numbers based 10 and maybe that standard that we're assessing. And then the next one is geometry. For ELA, it really never works out that you could just do something discretely. There are writing prompts in every grade. And again, everybody freaks out. Does that mean that every grade is going to have the writing prompt on the summative test? No. We're still only measuring at grade 4 and grade 8. But again, it was one of those talking about instruction and kind of reminding that 3rd grade teacher, writing's important. You need to be doing this. And here's some sample items that you can start working with. Reminding the 5th and 6th grade, writing's important, 7th grade, because the 8th grade teacher is going to be the one who really has to hone in all those skills for that final on-demand writing process. So we build those in for districts who can use that prompt. that they think is pretty good, you know, and how it's kind of based off of passages or text. So kiddos are writing towards that. So, you know, we just want to get more samples out there, and we wanted samples in the off grades to really help promote that writing isn't the poor fourth grade and eighth grade teachers' responsibility. You know, a lot of times districts do hone in on that, and then take away things, and we're always pulling that. For science, you'll notice that we say grades 5 and 8. 5 and 8 are what we reassess. We did put in grade 3 science standards. We put in grade 4 science standards, and then grade 5. Because we know some districts are doing a very good job of kind of blending. They're looking at more themes. So sometimes maybe a third grade standard isn't taught at their LEA in grade 3 because it fit more into the grade 4 theme of life science. So they were pulling in some of the grade 3 standards in grade 4 and grade 5 science standards and kind of blending them together to themes. So you will see grade 3, grade 4, and grade 5, just as you would see 6, 7, and 8 science standards. And again, it was another one of those, maybe it becomes a little bit more important or supports the district to really think about science itself isn't just the fifth grade teacher's responsibility to teach 5 years of science. I know it happens. We got a lot of responsibilities in the other core areas. But one of the other things that I will say to that is also that from the curriculum perspective, a lot of honing in and talking this year from the group is going to be about the shared reading. You know, that reading goes through all of the content areas, even in math, how to read the problems, how to, you know, to go through the pieces of text and what is important, what is not important, but also through science and social studies, that maybe you don't need that full 2 hours or an hour and a half of reading instruction, but using some of the text and informational text from the other core areas to really support those kids. And again, it may be one of those catch-alls of kiddos. I'm an elementary teacher at heart. As 9 years in the classroom teaching reading, and you know, and we were basal bound. There were units like, oh my God, if I could just get through this unit, I will be doing great, because the stories were just horrible, you know, and I knew the kids were not going to be engaged. So really kind of, you know, when you get more seasons, you start thinking about what could we engage from other topics, and especially informational, how we can really use our social studies reading for the day or the science reading for the day or the unit, but apply some of the English language arts skills that we need to, finding details of text. You can really teach that through the text that's more important for the kiddos, and it may be more engaging for some of those, especially some of your boys. And I hate to say that girls don't do science. A lot of girls love the science and are fantastic, but it may be one of those that it finally catches that kid. And he goes, okay, I'm going to engage in this and read today. So that's where we're really kind of honing in. You're going to hear that a lot from the curriculum. So, you know, these are science. People talk about it being a reading test. You will hear me say it's not a reading test. We don't measure reading. Remember, science isn't discrete facts anymore. It is about application. And with our world of science, so many things change. There's so many things that we just don't want kids to memorize anymore. We all know the 9 planets. There are only 8 planets, and then a little dwarf planet and a bunch of pseudo planets, you know, but that's where we're trying to really hone in, that if we give you the information, you can acquire that information and then apply that, you know, whatever question we're asking. It does mean that the kiddos need to read, but, you know, that hopefully we keep the text where it's at, but really endorsing that skill, that reading isn't just the book that they get from the library or the reading class. Reading goes through everything, and it's going to go through all of their high school career and then their post career, even working at Walmart. It's amazing just how many you have to watch and read things just to get to help the customer. So you'll see at the bottom of this slide, it is a hyperlink to the administration guide, which will give you a lot more detail. And we actually break it out into that guide exactly which standard is in which testlet. And so that'll help you if you start thinking about using these, which one do you want to do it, how you want to scope it out, or, put in your sequences. So the administration guide is very useful to really start thinking about that. And then, working with your teachers about which ones you may want to use and which ones you may not. You may have a standard that you look at your spring data, we do good on it every year. Don't do the testlet unless you got some kiddos struggling, and that may be how you want to use that. So definitely be very cognizant about that, if you're doing really good, you may not need any extra. You can put your efforts in other places. A lot of questions that we get is how often can the students take them? Again, that's up to you. Again, they can take them as often as you want. I fully recommend if you're maybe twice, you do a pre and a post, or administer it, and then if the kiddo didn't do very well, you may redo your tier 2 or tier 3 instruction, and then re-administer. Again, I know that a couple districts, and I hate to say this, when we're peeking at the data, some of these kiddos were taking them 4 and 5 times, and this is where I put the onus back on a lot of the conversations about we spend too much time on testing. And the state assessment gets thrown under the bus, and we'll take it. And the tire marks over the head for it. But our test is only one time of the year. We're less than 1%. But what you're doing in the classrooms all the time, testing these kiddos. And if you heard me at any of our SRSA or when we were doing our Innovative Assessment Design Authority roadshow, I worry about classrooms testing for proficiency instead of teaching to proficiency. So, that's where assessments do the one thing. It measures what you've taught, but I know we've got teachers who are like, I need more items to teach. And that just makes me scared. That they're just teaching items and not teaching the standard. And that really does apply later when you start looking at the high school and you talk to your high school teachers about the kiddos just don't know what they're doing. And they're low level skills, 4th, 5th, 6th grade skills. We're still having to reteach them how to do this. But their test data look pretty good. It's just, they really don't know what they're doing. They just go through the motion. Now, when the motion changes a little bit, as we add more complexity to the mathematics, and I'm really thinking about math, it doesn't look like what they were taught in 5th grade. No, we've added more complexity. We've added more steps. We've added more symbols. The order of operations doesn't always look like what you thought it was. Now you got to figure out parentheses. And so we really want to hone in that you use them as you see fit, but you will hear from the curriculum office and the assessment office is we really want instruction to be the lead and assessment provides you the information after. But we do know out there are a lot of inappropriate behaviors, and we say behaviors or methodologies being that if we teach test items, kids will do good on the test. Yes, but are they really doing good to the standards? And generally, I can probably say no. So there are, again, no minimum, no maximum. Nobody's monitoring to say, hey, you're not using this, or hey, you're overusing it. We still rely on the expertise of you guys. Your kids and you know what you need to do. And for some of those kiddos who are absolutely struggling, you may need to do a lot more or do a lot. One of the things also that I didn't mention here, with the 3 through 8, these are identified by the grade that the standard is assigned. But when you put a kiddo in, they will not be fully assigned to they can only see 7th grade standards. So another one of the luxuries of things that I'm happy with where we're getting DRC is, okay, so we got struggling kids. Let's say a struggling reader in 7th grade. Okay, maybe you could go down to the 3rd grade testlet and put them into that. And it would be at that 3rd grade passage. And those are things that you can work on and hone in on some of those other skills that are missing. Thinking about math. If you're working through and oh my God, these kids they keep missing fractions. They're just blowing up fractions, and this is your 8th grade teacher who's trying to teach proportions. Okay, maybe we need to go back to the 5th grade standard, that one that's talking about fractions and about equivalency and how to do these. Maybe we just throw this testlet in there just to see what do they know as the foundation. So again, they're assigned to the standard, but when kiddos go in, you can start assigning them in different ways. If you want to accelerate kids, you're more than welcome to accelerate. Where I am starting to see LEAs is using this is going back and trying to fill holes or identify the holes themselves to that standard or to the domain even of, okay, this is where the kiddo's got the gap. Now I know what I can work on. So that's been really beneficial. Now saying that, and I will just kind of jump ahead real quick here. As we said, we've got 3 through 8. End of course is coming for our 4 core for Algebra 1, English 2, Biology, and Government. Those will be available right now. We're shooting for November 23rd. Those will be available November 23rd. But thinking about your freshmen who are struggling, and again, I'm going back to you've got them in Algebra 1 or maybe even pre-algebra, and Jennifer could probably attest to this quite a bit, that they struggle with ratio and proportion. They struggle with fractions. They struggle with a couple other things in the middle school skills. Put those kiddos into those testlets. Go grab those testlets and start thinking about those items and then where to finding those gaps of the kids learning or misunderstanding and miscommunicating what they know. Again, hopefully when we get the whole spectrum built out with the EOCs that we can see, teachers can see this. And that'd be the same thing for science, that maybe biology teacher wants to go back down to the 6, 7, and 8 to get some of those key foundational life skills, life science skills or life science standards to really start rebuilding the foundation. Thinking about photosynthesis, the early entry into photosynthesis and then where they have to fully apply it, or thinking about respiration where it does get introduced in middle school, but mastery of respiration and photosynthesis and all of that occurs at the high school level in biology. So we're really hoping just the LEAs can start to see the flexibility and identify the flexibility of being able to move kiddos in and out and putting them in the right place to find things that we know that kiddos are struggling with. So a lot of questions for, are these just all multiple choice? And again, I kind of highlighted no. We're trying to get a whole plethora of different types of item types in there for those teachers to see, and be able to be familiar with. Also, with the practice forums, the tutorials that we have available, but just also being able to see the items in multiple ways I think is going to be good. It helps them to think about kids and how they actually see things and work through things, and can they actually do it in different modes. And sometimes kids maybe just struggle with multiple choice because they talk themselves out of the answers, where there may be a constructive response where the kid can tell you that. But then on the vice versa, kiddos are good at guessing. We know that a lot of times with multiple choice, the constructive response really forces that kid to tell you what you know. So, that's another way to really use those items in a sense. Now, the one thing that we don't have yet is we don't have scoring from DRC. We just don't have a plethora of humans sitting around waiting for Tesla construct a response or writing prompts to come in. So any of those that are text entry responses that can't be computerized scored, we're not an AI scored or an automated scored situation yet. I'm saying yet. I know that we're probably going to have to look towards that as I keep alluding to the SRSA assessment, this new assessment design that we're working on and getting data back quickly. We're going to have to figure out how we can do that. And that will be thinking about how we can automate more of constructive response scoring from a computer perspective that's been trained by humans to get that data back to the teacher real quickly. But the teachers, if you've used the practice forms online, there is a teacher portal for the educators. It will have all the student responses that they've typed in. That's also with the math using the equation editors. You would see what the students put in as their equation. The teacher would score that, and then it'll populate that scoring reporting. Again, student responses for the machine scores, 24 hours. Roughly about 24 hours, maybe a little bit quicker. If you test in the afternoon, it should be there first thing in the morning, which is less than 24. But if you're doing anything during that day, it really will not populate that afternoon. Again, as we talk about that, every evening the scores will be repopulated. So, if you don't have to wait for all of your kiddos. If you've got half your kiddos who took it on Monday, the other half takes it on Tuesday. Tuesday, you've got Monday's responses. Wednesday, you'll get Tuesday's responses. So the system should continuously keep building and building and building the score reports and your item analysis reports. One of the things that we're putting on here, and I know that some administrators are not happy with, they want it scaled. We don't want it scaled. We don't want to put kiddos into buckets. Again, we don't know how these are used, when they're used. So you will get a percent correct, points possible, points earned, and then percent correct to that item. From the student perspective all the way up to the classroom perspective. Again, we're really being diligent about, we want this data to not be punitive to students, but informative to the educator and to the students. And really being say, hey, Johnny, we're struggling with this. You're struggling with this. How can we help you? This is where we're really hoping that, again, we can take the negative connotation of assessment out and really say assessment is informative. The item summary report is very similar to what you get at the spring. And it's in the portal right now where you pull your spring reports. It's a whole data set. There is one little thing, don't use the pivot table. Jennifer can probably attest to this. Don't use the pivot table. Once you've picked your class, your grade, your subject, and once that pivot table appears, click on one of these cells in the pivot table, and then a pop-up screen comes up, and you get your whole spreadsheet, which will also give you the text description of the standard. So if the teacher doesn't know the item or the standard code, it will give them the MLS description too. It's a little workaround, and it's one of those I need to get with the testing coordinators to kind of show that workaround from the pivot tables. They're nice, but it really doesn't always produce all of the data that I know some of the teachers or as district testing coordinators or coaches, the data that you want. So that's a kind of a little trick around that. So kind of getting into where I know one of the Sue was kind of mentioning is about what the uses. Again, we're starting to hear a lot of uses of districts are using the standalones. They are using the DRC system. Others are using just the PDFs. because it is a lot of time for district testing coordinators to get kids loaded into the system. So in Insight, there are the PDFs for every one of these, and there are Braille ready files. So if you've got any visually impaired student, we have not produced physical Braille. One, because we just didn't know the use. But also if we ever need to refresh items or pull items, you know, trying to do the Braille takes 6 to 9 months to get a paper form done and get it printed and embossed. So we've got Braille ready files. So if you have an embosser at your district, you can just load the file and then emboss and create those at any time that you want. There is also a large print PDF. So that would go to an 18-inch piece of paper, or you can even get it bigger for whatever you may be doing locally at your school district. But there are PDFs of these to use locally, so you don't have to use the test engine because that's a lot of time, it's a lot of loading, and do you need to do it all the time? Maybe not. So where we kind of talk about that, where teachers are using the PDFs or even the LEAs, they're starting to even just break them up. They're not giving the whole testlet. They're doing a testlet, one of the items or two of the items per day. They're using it as bell ringers, you know, and that's perfectly fine. We definitely want the items to be used, and they can use them as they see fit. Use them as bell ringers, use them as items in your own even assessments. If you've got a local assessment, you kind of just recreate it or copy it and embed it into your own local assessments. That's where we're seeing that, you know, some teachers are just putting it as another, they're taking an item and actually working it out with the kids as part of the instructional package. So they actually know they've got a vetted item that Missouri educators are using. So they're putting it up. Is they've done the instruction, then they're putting that item up, you know, kind of working it through with the kiddos, just in instructing towards that item. I think those have been some really cool things to use, just like with the practice form. I mentioned this with the release practice form. It's nice. It's a nice clone. Giving it the whole thing, I think, it served its purpose back in 2017. Everybody knew what the test was going to look like. You know, this many sessions, about this many items. I think now it is really coming down to taking the practice form, breaking it apart, using those items when it's appropriate, popping it in here, popping it in there, which is one of the bigger things that I know Susan and I did a session with an LEA this summer. We took the testlets, but we also took the practice form, and we set them out in front of the teachers. Now the testlets for math is a little more, you kind of get you're caught. We already know that it's aligned to the standard. But for like the practice form, we didn't give them the alignment, and we didn't give them the answer key. And we said, now align this item and tell us which one's the correct answer. So it was one is kind of working with the teachers to really hone in on their skills, and do they understand the questions, but also understand the standard. Once we worked on that piece, then this is where we started pulling in the testlets, is especially the multiple choice and the multi-selects. We asked teachers to start going, okay, all of the incorrect answers, why are they there? What is the misconception that is why the author said, here's an incorrect response? And generally we write them to a misconception, or, you know, a known pathway that students will always do. You know, if you're thinking about math, the order operations, a lot of kids always gravitate to, you know, if the item had multiplication and addition, you know, the kid always starts with addition first. You know, this is what they always feel common about. So, you know, it's really kind of honing in. So when you do get that data back, because in that full report, you will actually see for like multiple choice, the answer the child selected. So, if you start looking at an item and going, wow, half the kiddos chose A, and you can look at your cheat sheet or whatever you got and go, oh, this is misconception. This is, I either introduced it or it got brought into it, in the classroom. And that's what that you can hone in real quickly to fix instead of just starting all over and doing the lesson louder. Sometimes what we think about the tiered instruction is now you know exactly where to target. I know if I just fix this, then the kiddos, one, aren't frustrated. They know what they need to work on, and we can work on it together. And we know that's what's being the crux of everything that may be causing our issues. So I've kind of babbled here for too long. But so now I'll just kind of open it up. Are there any questions that you guys want to throw at it?
Yes, please feel free to unmute or put your question in the chat. I have questions. And I hope I don't show my lack of knowledge by asking this, but I helped a charter school last year at Testlets, and they did the PDF in March, right? Is what we had available last spring the same as what we have now, or are the MITS different in those testlets?
There's no difference.
Okay.
I would love to be able to produce more, but I keep hinting at this SRSA. So I'm going to need a huge item bank. So what we've carved out right now, we have, and I keep mentioning the success ready assessment that we're trying to build for 2030. We're looking at trying to build an adaptive test.
Mm-hmm.
So that means we need 800 to 1,200 items per grade, per content, to really get to that scope of where kiddos are at, test security, so all those things. So right now, what items that we are building, we're trying to keep into the bank to use as we use for future. But that isn't to preclude that our curriculum coordinators are looking at multiple ways that we could have LEAs build maybe an item bank that we can insert into kind of upgrade our MITS.
Okay.
But right now, what is available was what was posted last fall.
Thank you. Anybody
Leave
else?
it simple. We like it. Leave it simple. So I have a couple questions here. So is there a way for the teachers themselves to download the grade level testlets instead of going through our testing administrator? That was a real pain last year. I mean, getting the downloads and getting them out to the grade level assessors was tough. Is there a way that we can go in and find those banks and get them downloaded on our own in the PDF forms?
Here's the thing with it all being housed into Insight right now, and I really want to say this, why we're kind of keeping it there is there are a couple of vendors out there who are pulling all of our stuff.
Yeah, they are.
And turning it around and reselling it to you, which is atrocious, because then by the time that they produce it and then they sell it, then the questions you guys give them, then they call me and say, hey, can I have the code to do this item to drag and drop? Or do you have all of the scoring materials for this? And I'm like, I'm not giving you that. I mean, we've given this to the LEAs. So we're kind of keeping it there. I believe you can actually go in and when you assign rights to educators, if you go into Insight and say, Mrs. Jones, this, and then, for testlets, then I think you can go in and start sorting out and giving rights.
Yeah.
On that, like I said, I know a couple of the districts, especially now the ones who said, we used them last year. Did they change? No. So I can just use what I got stored in our own servers.
Okay. So when we take this test in the fall, we want to try to take it. So last year in the fall, we did the PDF forms. The teachers who had buy-in already did them. We increased our scores. I mean, it truly was a remarkable difference. And we do believe that the testlets helped us tremendously. But then in the spring, we went ahead and gave the online version. The teachers who were still, bought in, gave that. And we noticed a big difference. when we go in the spring, do we have to reset passwords and go through our testing coordinator, or are the passwords the same and we are able to reset that test on our own? Does that also need to go through our testing or district coordinator, or can that also be, given assigned out to people?
So, I mean, your school coordinator could do that. If you've got a building coordinator, and I know some of the small districts building is it. So it would be that. That doesn't preclude that you could not assign a principal, kind of
Okay.
a building level rights to be able to do that, or maybe a lead teacher, if they're really good and understand the system.
Okay.
But if you do reuse it, it will reset the password, but then it becomes a continuous password for all of those again. This is one of the better ones. Once you've set it, it'll stay the same, but then when you reset it, it'll change the passwords, but it's not like the spring summative assessment where you got passwords for every session.
So do those 2 sessions so we actually love the ability to be able to go in and grade our own students' work, because we didn't think we would like that at first, but now we are looking and seeing, oh my gosh, this is why this kid didn't score, even though they've restated all year and they've done all, and then we're actually seeing their work and we're like, okay, this is great because we can go fix this first. So we love to do that as feedback with our kids. But at the same time, when we're grading that, it tells us a pretty good standard as, how to grade whatever. And we get our teachers together to try to do that. But will our fall scores automatically correlate with our spring scores somehow? Or are we taking those 2 same tests and just doing that on our own? Like the teachers, do we need to evaluate that? Or does the test actually, if a student's already been enrolled in the fall, are they comparable in the spring? And is that test going to give us those comparison scores?
Well, actually the same test. You're just retaking it. Yeah.
Yeah. But if a student is registered twice and they log in twice, will that give us a comparison or no?
I believe you still retain all of the data. And Jennifer may tell me if I'm wrong. And again, I've got so much jumbled up here in my head.
You'll have to do your own comparison.
Okay. All right.
Jennifer, I see your questions. Do you want to ask them?
Yeah, I'm wondering when the EOC level testlets are released in DRC, if maybe the PDFs could also be released at the same time instead of having to wait in January. We actually weren't able to see them and make decisions about what we wanted to use with the way that it was released last year until the PDFs came out.
I think we're shooting for PDFs on the same day.
In November 23rd?
November 23rd. I'm
Nice.
really thinking that we'll have the PDFs and the online. What we won't have until January, I do know in January, we will not have Braille ready files. So if any visually impaired student who needed a Braille form, that file is still being produced by American Publishing House. It's an outside vendor that does all the Braille work, and we're in the queue right now. They have promised to get us by January, but I don't see it until January for a Braille ready file.
And my other question is just thinking into the future, maybe it's my wish list, but if there might be a way that we could roster via Clever or some other third-party contractor like that, because the rostering process is incredibly time consuming, as is the maintaining and putting in kids as they transfer in, things like that. It is, for a district my size, that could be a full-time job for somebody
Oh,
to
yeah.
manage the testlet system.
And that's what small district. I can tell you, I know a couple of years ago, because I believe they had you and Dave and a couple that were looking at trying to do an SIS integration. It didn't go well, but they are looking now at, a lot has changed in the last couple of years, of looking at an API, an automated interface. So we are working at a state level currently with them this year to think about how to interface our pre-code file, because right now it's a hands, load it, and then it gets processed. If we can just go directly from what you load in Moses, it's been certified and it goes directly into there. So if they can get that API working, so it won't be this year, but they are looking at an API type of, and that way it's not
Or
confined.
like a nightly refresh. So
That I'm not sure about, trying to get it to an automated talking every night, but it would be an automated process, so you wouldn't have to try to put all these kids into a file, load it and sort it. It would be able to pull. But again, I can take that back to the owner and DRC leadership.
I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people in other districts, and very few people feel like they can use the DRC system the way that it was intended because of the time consuming part of it.
Well, and that's why the PDFs are there for sure to use.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because again, online and doing this on top of, especially our poor elementary folks who already got literacy assessments coming out of their ears, plugging kiddos into, if you're using iReady, iStation, all of those companies, and trying to integrate what pre-code did you do, or what kiddos did you load into what group and when? It gets absolutely confusing. So, that is the huge thing, is I'm trying to think about the API process and how we can integrate that. I know that is a big key feature in our next RFP, is trying to get away from loading to the state, because we also know the Moses is nice and it will run a check, but if you don't click certify, it doesn't get sent, and that's that process. If you've ever done that, you load the data, then you've got to certify that data. And many districts load it, they see that it ran and it looks clean, but they never hit that certify button. And then 2 weeks, or the day that all the kiddos are supposed to be in the system aren't there, and they're like, well, what happened? And I have to call over, and they go, well, they never certified their file, so we didn't send the file. And so then we're all scrambling within 20 minutes trying to figure out how to load all these kiddos into the system. So
even on our end, though, with that pre-code system, once it's through, I mean, the space of time has already passed, right? So we've already got transfers, and then we still got transfers up until through the testing window. So it's still a lot of maintenance. It's still a lot of manual kind of stuff.
Oh, I know. So I mean, the more that they can get to that process, and I will tell you, I just, like I said, what we got on here prior, I was at WIDA, which is a huge conversation too, with 42 states who use Insight also for the WIDA assessment. It's like everyone else are going, do you know how many the transient kids within the EL population, how many kids are moving constantly? I didn't even realize in Alaska, Anchorage alone has 100 to 150 kids moving every day, just in their Native American population. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you guys have got to get this figured out. So they're getting pushed from other pieces of their contracts too.
We've got about 5 more minutes on the call. If there's any final questions for Sean, we want to make sure we take advantage of having his expertise.
Yes, thank you, Sean. So I have 2 questions. Map A, in the Missouri Testlet, in the instructional testlets or the booklets, it states that Map A students are required to take this up to 7 times a year. Is that a different listing for the word testlet? Is that something different for Map A?
Yes, that is through the kite.
Okay, okay. So, and then also, what's the correlation with MoLeaps here? Anything that we need to be familiar with that we can pull from MoLeaps that is driven through the testlets, or that we can review within the testlets, or is there zero connection there?
I mean, They're separate, but I know where some districts are starting to blend them together. So they've actually gone through, and I believe ELA has done this, and I know social studies has done it. They've actually got a full spreadsheet in the MOLE block page in that box
Yes,
for all the standards per to each MOLE block.
they've updated those, correct? Like this past year or something changed. They've updated those MOLEBs.
We've put a whole plethora of new blocks in there.
Okay.
And it's going through box, so it's a whole lot simpler to just download and get what you want.
Okay.
But again, that's where a couple of the LEAs are starting to look at the Tesla and going, hey, and yeah, we want to grab this. The math one is, there's not a lot in there. But if you're thinking about science or the ELA, and then the ELA and social studies blocks, because they do have where we've correlated, hey, this really supports this ELA standard in this third grade social studies MOLE block, then you can really just start blending them together if you really want to look at it from that perspective. And it just gives you more instructional resources.
Okay.
The Step Up consultants were just talking this morning about how great the new MOLE blocks are and how underutilized we think they are. And so we're going to start trying to promote that because they're so comprehensive and so user-friendly and aligned to all the things that are important. So
yeah, they offer some really good resources and just some, some outsource links that are helping in our classrooms and RTI. Teachers don't really like to plan that. They don't love to have to do that time of day. So
right.
MTSS and RTI are not, fun topics, but when you have something and a resource to go to, it's a little bit simpler for teachers. So
yeah, and I mean, again, there's districts who have, and then there's a lot of the districts that are have not. So, we're hoping, that they can pull any of that and use as supplemental resources, or, a couple of districts are like, we really don't have anything for social studies. So we've really kind of just matched up. We've got these 6 blocks here that really supports American history, what we want to teach, and it's covering the standards. We're pretty good. And we're like, okay, and as long as you've got the good instruction around it, that the test, that MOLE block isn't the full intent of the instruction, but I know that they're really using it to support, again, especially from an elementary perspective. Sometimes, especially if you're textbook driven, there's just sometimes some of the source material that they used isn't any good or it's not engaging for the kiddos. And some of these testlets have been or not testlets, but the MOLE blocks, the kiddos have been finding very engaging. And especially for social studies, and I'll go on this last piece, are those, what we call the EDs, the explorations and discoveries. Very small, just inquiry. So you can take it from one perspective. Either the kiddo can grab it and run with it and do the inquiry, or the teacher can guide the inquiry, and work with the kiddos. So, there's a lot of things that may just pique that kid's interest and keep them engaged instead of the textbook is boring and they don't want to do it.
Right. I just want to say thank you. If I had tried to do this call on my own understanding, it would not have been nearly as informative. Sean, thank you so much for agreeing to do this for us. And I know you've had just a very busy week, so thank you so much for sharing. We will record this. Obviously, it's been recorded, and we're going to upload it to our website so it'll be available. So if you want to watch it again or share it with someone, you can. Sean, would we have opportunity to have access to your slides, or is that a no?
It over to you.
Okay.
Because that link is in there to the administration manual.
Yes.
Which I think is the very first thing is, Jennifer kind of alluded to. If you know what's being in the testlets themselves, then they can start picking out and going, we want to use this, we don't want to use that. And it'll just kind of help you to start planning and guiding. And again, tackling this, small bites, maybe take the large bites if you're really thinking it's going to support you. And again, I think this type of network will tell you, hey, this is how it's working for us, and then how it's not working. I will tell you, it will not work if that is the instruction.
Right.
I hate to say that, but worked with a district who's really struggling, but we really work with this vendor's test, and we work with the kids' test questions all the time. I'm like, did you instruct the standard? And then they're building their proficiency standards, and it was really about the proficiency of the item itself and not what the can do's of the kid to this and what you can do to the standard. And proficiency was really about what you did on the test, not the standard itself. And I worry about that with our item specs. It's a great document. I want to be open and fair how we assess and what we're assessing. But when it becomes a district's curriculum, or the teacher said, that's my ceiling and that's all I'm going to do, I really worry that sets the kids up for failure later, because you really didn't get to the top of the standard, to the mastery. Is every kid going to get to there? No, they're not. But at least they've been challenged. They know what's coming. You're laying some of that foundation work, but then also your top kiddos are getting that challenge of getting to that mastery, the top of that standard, being able to apply it, to synthesize it, to do whatever. Because one of the big things, and I know you guys are busy too, but as I'm alluding to with the SRSA, we're really wanting to take the standards, and as we look at now with the 5 achievement levels, we really got to start breaking these standards out to thinking about the learning progression. Where are you at from the beginning to getting to what we would say, hey, you've mastered this, but also to demonstrate, and especially, again, I will put all onus on the elementary. We're generalists. None of us really got to be the fine grain, got all 18 math theory classes to understand why you're teaching long division. But if we really show where that division in 4th grade goes through the spectrum and how it applies to 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, how it applies to algebra, to really show to that teacher the importance of why you're doing what you're doing, is one of our next big steps. And I will say, you'll probably hear us within the next 45 days begging and pleading for teachers' time. And I know it is hard. We don't know how we're going to try to figure it out, because we know it's hard to pull teachers out of the classroom because no subs are available. You need that teacher because they have the expertise. But we also need their expertise to really think about these learning progressions and where this all applies out into the learning maps of where the kiddos are at, and showing the correlations, because again, we see a lot of times that we teach that standard and we teach it very linear. This is the only way to do it. But we know our whole classroom comes in from 15 different perspectives, different ways to attack it. And there are different ways to understand it. That they came in from this way and this way. So if we can figure out how to really show educators, hey, Johnny's not coming in from the traditional pathway of learning this. They came in from this side, using maybe geometry skills to apply to this, understanding linear equations, but they're applying it from a geometry perspective, that this is how we can support them. Not only support the students, but support the educators to really say, okay, you're not going to get frustrated. Here's where kiddos are saying this is what they're doing. And now you know how to be prepared for them. That's what we're really hoping, that we can start looking at this from a bigger perspective. Here's the standards. Good luck and teach them, but really get into the crux about the all of how they were developed, why they're developed, and then the big learning around all of the learning of the standards.
Right.
Can you tell us whether there was an obvious gain in schools that use these fluidly, or is that a between you and me question? Are you seeing gains there from last year? And
haven't dove into that piece yet. I will say, with our PI grant that we had, that was 5th grade math. I will say the LEAs who dove in headfirst and used it and really bought into and we did build learning progressions for that. And I'll send you that, Sue.
Yeah.
What we did for 5th grade math, they bought into it. Scores went up phenomenal. One district had 4 kids proficient advanced in 4th grade. They went up to 18 kids proficient.
Okay, that's great.
It's only a class of 21. So, now that they're already saying, they came back and said, well, can we use it again next year? And it's like, well, I think we've got enough funds that we can keep it alive for one more year. But, I said, the bigger thing is you've got to apply the same philosophy to grade 6 so we don't lose those kiddos. So we'll be kind of helping them. Mary Majerus is helping them with that. But I am seeing it when they're using it as instructional. And I will say that I think your comment supports a few other LEAs that I have heard. When they're going back and using it and thinking about the instruction, and again, if it's RTS or RTI or just tiered, we went back and helped kiddos. They did see gains. Were they every kid's proficient advanced? No, but I think they saw it more when they said, hey, our growth, we saw the kids grow, and I think our growth data is going to be projected above where they thought we would.
That's great.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.